very good.
Very good. Show it, show it. If you're happy and you know it, show it.
You want some coffee?
Oh, it's okay. That's it? Where's your brother? He's coming in.
He knows what's good for
All right. We're coming to Peissach, and everybody's preparing for Peissach. Everybody knows basically what Peissach is about. Peissach is about becoming a Baal Tshuva. That's what Peissach is about. And if we understand what transpired at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, we will understand ourselves much better. What's happening with us. It says, we say in the Haggadah, it says in the Chumash, that Peissach, which represents Yetzias Mitzrayim, Kam Gan of Mitzrayim, meant or means the freedom of the Jewish people. They came out of Mitzrayim, of Egyptian bondage, and they became free. And then further down in the Torah it says, regarding Evet Knani, regarding various things, it says, Hashem says, Avodai Heim, that the Jewish people are my slaves. That's what Evet means. For I've taken them out of Mitzrayim. So if the Jewish people have been substituted one slavery for another, how is that freedom? As a matter of fact, during the journey through the desert, and you know that many different episodes, rebellious episodes, occurred during this journey. And one of the things that the Yidden were saying, and Rashi explains, they said, we still remember the fish that we ate in Mitzrayim, chinam. Chinam means gratis.
What?
Gratis, free. So Rashi says, what do you mean chinam? The Egyptians gave them fish gratis. They didn't even give them straw for kneading into the brick. All of a sudden they gave them fish free. So Rashi says, when they mean over there chinam, it means chinam min ha-mitzvos. We didn't have restrictions. We didn't have restrictions in our lives. We can eat whatever we want. We can act whichever way we want. And now we are restricted by godly law. So that's a restriction. And yet the Torah declares, and this is what we are living with for 3,000 years, this is something which granted us freedom. Clearly, the term freedom needs to be properly understood. And when properly understood, we should be able to recognize that this freedom, which we claim, which we know, which we believe we've obtained at Tzias Mitzrayim, is truly a freedom, not just something on the surface, a superficial thing, but something that actually is capable of making us feel truly free. And what is the concept in general of freedom? We have to discuss this briefly because this term freedom is so widespread, and it has accumulated so many different meanings, and some of them are complete perversions of what freedom is. As a while ago, we pointed out in one of these discussions that a person who is in prison and he is provided food and board and lodging, and he yearns for his freedom. So you ask yourself the question, how are you not free? You're sitting there and everything is provided for you. So he says, well, I cannot venture out of these walls. I cannot go here, I cannot go there. So what happens afterwards when with God's help he becomes free? He goes out of these walls. So he starts running through all the streets that he couldn't go before. Is that what happens when he becomes free? Doesn't happen. Clearly, what he was yearning for is not the opportunity to walk the streets. There was something much deeper that imprisoned him, and he was yearning for freedom of that imprisonment. We all speak of freedom, and this is, as I said, widespread. And if we were to analyze our daily lives, no matter what, in what station and what circumstances, we're not free to drive the car through a red light. So we're not free. I want to go and I can't go. If I go, a policeman is going to stop me and give me a ticket. And if I have more than 4 tickets, he's going to arrest me. How am I free? I cannot do what I want. This whole idea of freedom to act, to run, to do as I please is a misunderstanding of the whole concept of freedom. Why is it a misunderstanding? Because as a matter of fact, there is no yearning. You know what yearning means? There's no desire in a person to be able to run the street whichever way he wants. A dog wants to run around. A person doesn't want to run around. He wants to be home. He wants to be in a peaceful place. He wants to be engaged. He's not looking for this kind of freedom. There is a human desire for freedom, that's in the general, and especially a Yid, the Yiddish and the Neshama. But we have to understand what is the freedom that it's seeking. And why is it seeking this freedom? What's wrong with just living in a constrained manner? We've discussed in the past, and hopefully some of you have accessed the archives. The human being is different than all other creatures in the world in that he has intelligence. Intelligence also is very often misunderstood. Many times people understand intelligence, smarts, figuring out ways to get around. That's not intelligence. Intelligence, human intelligence, means that a human being, if you show him an object, his first question is, what is this object doing over here? In other words, the fact for me to accept that it's here is not sufficient. It has to make sense that it is here. When we observe the world and we live in the world, it's not enough for us that we have food and we have a bed to sleep on. But what does it mean that we're here? It has to make sense. And if it does not make sense, then what does it mean? It means that I have to accept that this is here, and I have to accept that this is here, and it doesn't make sense, so I'm not free. I'm living in an environment which doesn't make sense to me. I can't relate to it. This is basically the principle of freedom, which is intrinsically a human quest, a human requirement. This is why a person who is in prison is yearning for his freedom. It is not the ability to move around and run wherever he wants. It is the ability to think and interpret the world the way he sees it, the way his mind and heart tell him. This is why when the Rambam talks about the Yetzer Hara, not often, but he does, he talks about when a Yid is driven to do an Avera, he says that at that time he is not free. Contrary to what some people view it and says, oh, I want to be free to do what I want. You have to understand that at that time the Rambam calls it Yitzur Onsei. He is under the duress and under the pressure of his Yetzer Hara, and he is not really free to think with his own mind. Because his own mind sees things completely differently. His own mind sees, as we're going to discuss, at the minimum, sees the world from an intellectual perspective, and truly from a divine and a godly perspective. This is how a Yid sees the world. And anything else is imprisonment. The Nefesh HaBahamis, you all learned it, I don't have to translate it, the Yetzer Hara, this is really a prison for the Nefesh HaLakis, literally. We've mentioned recently, and many times before, right in the beginning of the Rambam. The beginning of the Rambam speaks about the mitzvah of knowing Hashem. He says this is the principle, the beginning of Torah and mitzvahs. And he says that the principle, the first principle that allows a person to pursue wisdom and to understand, allows a person to relate to the world and understand the world, that it should make sense to him. The first principle is to know that there is a creator. If there is no creator, there is no world. To the human mind, if there is no creator, then there is no world. Although the world, I still feel it, I can still see it, but it's restraining me. It doesn't make sense to me. I can relate to it. It's like what's called superimposed. It's forced on me. It's not something that I can readily accept and make sense and say, oh yeah, it's here. This is the way the Rambam described it. He says that the union from knowing Hashem means to know that there is a first being who creates everything, and should one forget and think there is no creator, then he cannot imagine anything being. He cannot imagine anything being. So now we can come and discuss Yetzias Mitzrayim, and then we'll come back and discuss ourselves. We know that before Eden was subjected to the slavery in Mitzrayim, they were a free people. It wasn't a big nation, but whatever it is. This union that Eden should be enslaved in Mitzrayim was something which was planned by Hashem. He planned our enslavement for the purpose of them freeing us. So what's the purpose of enslaving and then freeing? Let them stay free in the first place. Prior to Mitzrayim, Eden were free. They were not enslaved by Pari or anybody. But this freedom was what we can call an inadvertent freedom. Advertent means it was a natural freedom. It was not a freedom that they recognized where they got it from. It was something which was just a matter of fact. And this is why, there's an interesting phenomenon which we have to understand. In Mitzrayim, the whole Jewish nation were enslaved, except for one tribe. Shevet Levi did not participate in the slavery. Why? How come the others were able to be enslaved and not Shevet Levi? And what's the answer? The answer is the others were able to be enslaved because they did not really relate to their freedom as a positive thing. This is something which I have it by force. The Shevet Levi had one statement. It says, we don't belong to you, we belong to Hashem. Therefore you can't enslave us. A freedom that does not have an underpinning reason, what is the basis for it, is able to be lost. And this is what happened in Mitzrayim. After Yetzias Mitzrayim, Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. And what does it mean took us out of Mitzrayim? He showed them, that Yetzias Mitzrayim was in a very miraculous manner. It was the plagues and then Kriyas Yamsu was full of miracles. These miracles were there temporarily. Because ultimately, when Eden went into Eretz Yisrael, there weren't consistent miracles. What is the point of these miracles? Was Hashem fooling them? I'm showing you miracles, so you come along and afterwards I'll let you drop? The union of these miracles was to give them an understanding what, in fact, is the real essence that gives them freedom and gives them their presence. So that later on, this will become their own understanding, and they will be able to relate to it with their own intelligence. So that the principle that when they came out of Mitzrayim, they became free and then became servants of Hashem, that principle really does represent the inner freedom of the Jewish soul. Because what is freedom? The presence of their lives, the presence of the world, as being God's world, is something which makes perfect good sense to the Jewish soul. This is what makes sense that there should be a world. Without that, then I'm in prison. I can't make sense of where I am. I have to accept the world, accept things, without really being able to relate to it, making sense of it. In other words, what happened in Yetzias Mitzrayim was that Eden, that the Jewish people, were now able to relate in their lives not to the world, but to the Creator of the world. This is what makes sense to them. Who cares for a world? But if there is a Creator, then they can relate to it. I want to translate this. It's a whole, a lot of things to talk about, but just the main thing is I want to bring it down to us. When we have now Torah mitzvahs, and we're all learning what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do. These Torah mitzvahs can be viewed in two ways. One way is that this is something which becomes an obligation on me personally. I have to do this and this. And if I do this and this, then I'm a good boy. And I'm allowed to be who I am. And if I don't do this and this, then I'm not a good boy. In other words, this whole burden, this whole duty of Torah mitzvahs is like an individual burden on the individual person. When you put a burden on a person, what happens? He feels the burden. He feels the pressure of that burden. He becomes self-contained. He starts thinking about himself. How am I going to assure that I'm going to carry this burden through? And instead of freedom, he gets imprisonment. He becomes more and more concerned about himself. Am I going to do this right? Am I going to do this right? Instead of freedom, of bringing a person out of imprisonment to a big world and to true life, it actually puts a burden on him and restriction. And his whole life is defined of whether he is a good boy or not a good boy. He's doing right or not right. So for this, we have to understand that the first principle of our freedom, the first principle of Torah mitzvahs, and the first principle of that which justifies Torah mitzvahs, is our recognition that we actually are not living in a physical world that has no meaning and no purpose, but we are living in a world that really belongs to God Himself. This is Yetzias Mitzrayim. In Mitzrayim, we were bound by the rules of nature. And this is how all the peoples in the world live. They're bound by the rules of nature. The Jewish people were permitted by Yetzias Mitzrayim to free themselves of the rules of nature and relate in the world, live in the world from the perspective of the true presence of the world, of the creator of the world. We do not have to regard and pay attention to the rules of nature. These are things which are superimposed on us. We have the freedom to judge what is right and what is wrong, regardless of what the rules of nature are. I want to give illustration of what that means in a practical, in a simple sense, and then we'll be able to put it all together. If you have a home, and you hire somebody to clean up your home, like Erev Peissach, many homes have people helping them clean up the house. This person who is cleaning up the house is cleaning up the house because they get paid for it. But the fact that the house is clean and the end result means nothing to them. What does he accomplish? He only accomplishes the fact that he needed money and he got paid for his work. But when a person cleans up or does something in his own home, then he does not at all feel the burden that he has to clean, because he is involved in making his own, in beautifying his home. So the work that he is doing is not work at all. It is something which is actually revealing and bringing out the true quality of his own life and the quality of his home. Instead of being labor and work to clean up, it becomes what's called a labor of love, because he's bringing out and showing the beauty of his own life. As long as we looked at the world as a mitzvah of the world, and then in this world we had restrictions. You have to act this way, act like this way. This was a burden, because we're in a strange place and we're doing things the way our boss wants us to do. Nothing to do with us. But once we recognize that this is really God's world, and by every mitzvah that we do, we are beautifying God's world. We are not just laborers who are doing something in a place that has nothing to do with us. But this is something which we are, as I said, beautifying and perfecting God's world. We are actual participants in building this world, this godly world. Therefore, the mitzvah itself, instead of being a burden, really becomes a source of freedom. Just like when a person beautifies his own home. So instead of the burden being focused on the person, you be a good person, you do this, you do that, we have been given the sense and the understanding that in fact we are really partners, we really own this world, we really partners with Hashem in perfecting this world, in perfecting Hashem's world. And every mitzvah and everything that we do is there, becomes part of our accomplishment. It's not just a laborer who did his job and then go home. This principle of understanding that Torah and mitzvahs that we have is something which really belongs and becomes part of our lives, and should in no way can it be taken as a burden, but rather this is something which is unburdening, which is freeing us, which gives us a place in the world. It gives us a place in God's world. It gives us a real meaning in our lives. this is a primary principle in Jewish life. We Jews, you know, the Jewish nation has a very long history. Has a history of 3,500 years. A very, very involved and colorful history. There's not a very long period of time that they went without change. It was a constant turmoil, constant ups and downs. especially in most recent history during the Holocaust, during the communist period. When a Yid under communism found a chance to sit and learn for a half hour, undisturbed, even though he had all kinds of fears, maybe he'll be caught, and then who knows what's going to happen. So, and he caught in this time, he was able to learn this period of time, especially learn with his children, learn in the Chavrusa. He literally experienced freedom on the highest level, because he then connected with his whole soul to his practical life. You would stand on the side and you would look, what kind of stupidity is this? He is afraid for his shadow, and he is free. And yet that was the real freedom. During the Holocaust, there were stories, numerous stories of people risking their lives and lighting Hanukkah candles someplace in a cave. And they felt the highest level of elation.
Of what?
Of elation, elevation, spiritual elevation. Why? On a personal basis, they were in a terrible situation. On a personal basis, they were even this was risking their lives, and the whole situation, to think what situation they were under. How can they all of a sudden be elated and be joyous? Clearly, it is that deep down in their souls, deep down in their intellect, they perceived clearly that their lives are not defined by the external circumstances, but that their lives are defined by the way they, deep down, the way they really understand the world. And this lighting of the Hanukkah candle meant that they have established a godly presence for this moment. And this gave them the greatest joy. We, Baruch Hashem, have passed through. This is all behind us. All of these heaven Yishenis are all behind us. The one Yisoyin that we still are facing, and we still have to struggle with and get a clarity with, is this one Nakud is to understand that Torah and mitzvahs is not a burden. And not only is it not a burden because this gives me a path in my life. Huh? A burden. Burden means a yoke. Okay. That actually, with Torah mitzvahs, we are the real participants in building this world. Some people will say, if you look externally, say, look, this guy is a big engineer and he's building the Empire State Building. What are you doing? You're cleaning for Peissach? Where do you compare to what he's accomplishing? You're eating dry matzahs, he's eating cake. How do you compare? And we'd say to him, listen, he is living in an imaginary world because that a world without a godly underpinning, I can't relate to it. That's for the dogs, that's not for a human being. I have the privilege of living in a world that really makes sense to me, that really frees me to think the way I think, the way things make sense. We have to, in preparation for Peissach, and then in Mitzvah during the holiday of Peissach, we have to reflect and experience this recognition that when we do a mitzvah, we are not doing a mitzvah just alone for my own sake. We're doing a mitzvah as participants in the big, great world that God made. No Eid, the Rebbe once said, during the time when communism was still in power, the Rebbe said, when a Yid does a mitzvah here, he gives strength to the Yidden out there in Russia. Nobody is isolated. We are actually, with every mitzvah, we are actually transforming the world. Not just doing the right thing for myself. We're actually transforming the world. And this is the principle that the Torah says, that the Rebbe says, I took them out of Mitzrayim, and I brought them into my service, so that now they are living in my world, not in the natural world, but in my world. And everything that they do represents a service, or it means, in simpler words, represents a transformation from a physical world to a godly world. And this is what Torah Mitzvah is all about. When a person begins to reflect, and I heard it say multiple times over here and there, what am I capable of doing? I'm not so smart. I'm not doing so well. I'm never going to be a big London. You have to understand what our life is about. It's not a question of how big a London scholar I become. we are, with every breath, with every deed, we are actually living in the real world. We are not here in preparation for life. We are actually living. When put on film, this is a real living. This is a real accomplishment. When we eat matzah, it's a real accomplishment. It's not a training ground. This is the real thing. And the ultimate strength, the ultimate power, the ultimate ability for our accomplishment is, as we mentioned in the past, and it says that actually everything that Ayid does, Hashem is always in partnership with him. When Ayid does something, Hashem is doing it with him. We have to unburden ourselves. Take off the yoke. In other words, not feel the yoke, not feel this is on me. This is a partnership. I'm doing it like a person who is doing in his own home. This is my own home. And I'm purifying my home, I'm cleaning my home. This is building for myself, for the real thing. And there is no sense of being on duty for someone else. This is being on duty for myself. The Rebbe once said that when a person has to carry diamonds, he won't even feel the weight of it. He's carrying diamonds. Why? Because he's so enthusiastic about the value of what he's doing, he doesn't feel that he's carrying a burden, a weight. In the final note, and just to hit it, so to speak, straight, why am I discussing it with you? In a Jewish home, every child knows that when I'm cleaning for Peissach, every other Jewish home is cleaning for Peissach. I'm part of a Jewish people. We're all doing it together. I'm not alone. I'm doing it because I'm Jewish, not because something which is focused on me. This is my burden to do. I'm a participant in everything that the Jewish people are doing. We have to, even though we are coming from outside, so to speak, of this realm, we're coming from a wild world that doesn't associate with the people. Everybody does their own thing. But now we've come into the Jewish fold, and we are learning what the Jewish people are doing. We have to learn and reflect that everything that we do, we are doing it in association with the entire Jewish people, not as an individual. It's important that we understand that we are really participating and joining in the whole Jewish people. Just like we said in the terms of it being our own home, this is our own people. This is not a burden on the individual. Say, okay, how am I doing? How I'm doing is immaterial. Every little brick, you added this brick, this added this brick, and together we are building like the Rebbe says, the whole Beis HaMikdash. Nobody can build it all by himself. but everyone is contributing his own input. Hopefully, and more than hopefully, surely, when we reflect on this, we will understand, we will get additional encouragement, additional enthusiasm in going through all our avodas and learning what we have to learn and doing what we have to do and preparing for building our own home in a simple sense. So that we understand we're building our home in Hashem's world. And therefore, this every requirement, every obligation, instead of being a burden, instead of being something that we would resent, it becomes a welcoming source of joy. And this is the principle when we say that the Jewish people are free. Jewish people are free does not mean they're free like an animal free to roam the streets and do what they want. They're free to reflect what their mind and heart and their soul really yearns for. And when we are constrained by our Yetzer Hara, we say, I'm not free. The Yetzer Hara is actually constraining me. It's actually imprisoning me. And I have to break through this imprisonment. Contrary to the way the world sees things, do what you want, that's your freedom. That's not freedom. That's not freedom at all. The real freedom is when a person is free and he can think with his clear mind and feel with his pure heart and relate to a true world that he really understands. And with this said, I want to wish you all a kosher Nefeilach and Peissach. You should all be successful to further come out of imprisonment in the world to true freedom, to true joy in doing Torah mitzvahs for the real purpose and the real reason, and seeing and recognizing how all your effort is really bringing you true joy and true freedom, and ultimately we'll all together build the third Beis Hamikdash. And then we'll all see the fruit of our labor.
Amen.
You know.
Someone that is smart sees something and he doesn't see the thing. He sees, why is this here?
Right in the beginning, right.
Meaning that when you are not able to see things like you want to see them, that's imprisonment. That's what you
If I have to accept this without knowing what it means, then I'm being restrained by it. Right? And if I have to accept the world just because it exists, not because it makes sense, then what does that mean?
It's imposed.
It's imposed on me. Yes.
The inability to understand something is a confinement in itself. To understand the true purpose of something is confined by the lack of being able to know what its purpose is.
That's true. But there are two levels in this. One level is there a purpose for it? Is an intellectual and spiritual